I've told you before, Jake, that my favorite time of the year outside of college football season, obviously, is right after spring and right before summer practice starts when we get the preseason win totals and we get the Heisman odds. So I've noticed that we've seen some shifts. There's been a little bit of movement. I wanted to talk to you today about your favorites, some guys you might put your money on. And obviously, we got to lead off with Caleb Williams since he's the returning winner, the projected number one pick of the draft next year. What are your thoughts on Caleb? Do you find any value in plus 500?
Well, as you said, this is definitely one of the best times of the year to be a college football fan if you're a fan of the Indiana Hoosiers. This is when we have all the hope in the world. This is when we can have a bowl game, a 9-win season. So I agree with you. This is definitely one of the best times of the year as a college football fan. Caleb Williams, am not really interested at all for Heisman at plus 500. I think the odds at plus 500 are absolutely horrific, especially when you look at the history of Heisman Trophy winners. In the last 15 years, only one preseason favorite, Marcus Mariota, has won the Heisman Trophy. And Caleb Williams, being already a one-time winner, would have to set history and become only the second two-time winner in Heisman Trophy history, with Archie Griffin achieved back in the 70s. It's been 50 years since anyone went back-to-back. And I don't think that plus 500 is good enough odds to take that chance again. I think he's got a lot of factors working against him. As you mentioned, he's the presumptive number one overall draft pick, which means if he gets injured at all, he could potentially take a lot of the time of the rest of the season off, similar to what Jackson Smith and Jigba, Nick Bosa have done in the past. You know, when you have a chance, Caleb, to lock in $30-40 million, you're not going to want to take a lot of risks if you have an injury. So I think there's a lot working against him. I think it's going to be tough to replicate last year's numbers. I think USC is going to have a lot more pressure on them if they don't make it to the College Football Playoff. And I think that there's almost no chance he has to win. He's going to have to go above and beyond what he did last year. And I'm not even sure he's going to be on the field for every single game.
Okay, I did not think you were going to come at me with that kind of energy towards Caleb because honestly, he does return a lot of production. Well, not even return. He's got 3 transfer offensive linemen. He has a transfer running back in Marshawn Lloyd. Dorian Singer transferred in. Zachariah Branch, the number one receiver in the country, is now on campus. He has a few guys returning at receiver like Brendan Rice, Mario Williams, Taj Washington. But because he's got so much new, there is going to be a little bit of a transition period, I think. I like the plus 500 in terms of it feels like there's a chance he could run it back and be the first one since Archie, like you said. Just look at the USC schedule. They've got a game at Notre Dame. That's going to be a big primetime moment for him. Mm-hmm. Home against Washington, at Oregon, home against UCLA. I was watching my friend JD Piquel from On3 talk about some Heisman stats today, and he talked about how a lot of Heisman winners win it in November. The November slate for USC lines up perfectly. Washington, Oregon, UCLA. And he'll get some warm-up games earlier on in the year. So, yeah, I like the plus 500. I'm not sure if I'll take it because I just don't like those odds like you had said before. I'd want to get it at least plus 750 for it to make sense because anything can happen. But I'm probably going to stay away with you. Caleb does have a pretty good chance to win, though. I know you
Those November matchups are definitely key. Going against Washington and Michael Penix and Oregon and Bo Nix, those are 3 of the big favorites for the entire year for the Heisman Trophy. And those head-to-head matchups we've seen in the past can really determine who ends up winning the award.
Well, I know you told me one of your favorites for this year is actually another Pac-12 team, or he's on a Pac-12 team. That's Michael Penix Jr. What are your thoughts on his odds at plus 1,600?
Yeah, Penix is definitely my top pick to win the Heisman Trophy this year. He led the entire Division I in passing yards last year, with the exception of the Western Kentucky quarterback, which is a mid-major. He's got no chance to usurp Penix. So Penix, number 1 in the country in passing yards, returns both of his top 2 receivers, got the same coach from last year. There's a lot in place that's going to make Penix even better than he was last year. That's mentioned, the guy has an absolute cannon for an arm, is a gunslinger. And as you said, Washington has a lot of opportunities in the Pac-12 against some of the other top teams like USC, like Oregon, that he could really show out and make some statements against. And as I said, Williams, Nix, and Penix all have great odds for the Heisman. What do those 3 have in common? They're all in the Pac-12. Pac-12 defense is kind of optional, so those guys could all put up huge stats. Penix, I think, has a great opportunity. If Washington goes 10-2, makes it to the Pac-12 championship game, maybe even makes the playoffs. I think they got an outside shot at that. And if those happen, that's some great narrative strength to go along with. Those going to be great numbers for Penix.
Another thing I saw was that Washington has 2 of the best receivers in the entire country who are returning. So I think there's a lot working in his favor. I think I'm going to ride with you on that. You know, one name that I saw that I liked was Quinn Ewers at plus 1,400. And my initial thoughts, I don't know what your thoughts are on him, but my initial thoughts were that Quinn, not a bust last year, but he was overhyped and he didn't live up to the expectations that we thought he would. I was expecting a 3,000-yard season for him. I was expecting Texas to win 8 games, and they just couldn't get there. He had 58% completion percentage. He only threw 296 passes, but a 15-6 touchdown to interception ratio after he came off an injury. Yeah, it just wasn't the first season that I would have expected from the former superstar 5-star quarterback. His schedule lines up to be pretty good this year, though. You've got a game at Kansas State. He's at TCU, home against Texas Tech. Those are all big stages, but the premier game for his entire year where he's got to do something to really get himself on the map is going to be at Alabama in week 2. So I look for him to have a way better 2023 than he did 2022, partially because of his returning production at receiver. You've got Xavier Worthy who comes back. You've got Adonai Mitchell, who was from Georgia last year. We saw him. He didn't play that much because he had an injury, but now he's at Texas. And you've got Isaiah Nair, who didn't play at all last year. He was a former Wyoming transfer. He's got real talent on the outside, and I think Quinn Ewers is finally going to live up to the hype that most of us thought he was going to have last year.
Yeah, that Alabama game last year against Texas was interesting. Ewers gets injured in that game, and he was looking pretty strong in that game. Then Hudson Card comes in. Texas only loses that game by 1 point. So if Ewers stays in the entire game, they probably win that game, and the entire season is different for Texas. But they didn't. They lost, and as you said, Ewers last year was not particularly impressive to me. I remember you and I were watching a lot of Texas football and commenting on how we expected Ewers to look a lot better. And I think a lot of the competition for him is going to come from his own teammate, Arch Manning. They got the number 1 overall quarterback in the country, Peyton and Eli's nephew, in his quarterback room. And I think if Ewers is able to hold off Arch and keep the job, he will have a shot at the Heisman because that's the level he's going to have to play at to keep his job.
Well, after spring, the understanding is that Arch isn't going to unseat Quinn. Quinn's got that job kind of secured, so if he really
he's got it secured to start the season. It's a whole different story if he starts out and plays poorly the first few weeks.
Takes one injury and it all changes. Well, there is a name on here who you brought up to me, Marvin Harrison Jr. He had proven a lot last year. What are your thoughts on him at plus 2,500?
Yeah, Harrison Jr. is kind of the guy I'm looking at in that mid-tier of odds. Receiver is a tough position to take for the Heisman. Devonta Smith did win a couple years ago, but he was the first wide receiver to win since Desmond Howard in 1991. So the odds are kind of stacked against Harrison in that sense. However, Harrison, an absolute beast of a receiver. 77 catches for 1,263 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. Was playing great in that game against Georgia until he got injured. If he doesn't get injured, Ohio State potentially goes on to win that game if they have Harrison on the field. Everyone was expecting massive things from Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, and he gets injured and sits out the entire year pretty much. And it was not an issue for Ohio State's offense at all. Harrison Jr. was able to take a big step up, take over that lead dog role. Now he's coming back, going to be the top wide receiver taken in the draft. He's going to be force-fed the ball. And with a new quarterback coming in McCord for Ohio State, I would look for him to be feeding Harrison Jr. You got the top receiver in the country. You got to throw him the ball. So I think he's going to get a lot of work this season. I think a 100 reception season is definitely possible, somewhere around 1,500 yards. And I expect him to have at least 14 touchdowns like he had last year. And with those numbers, those are definitely going to put him in Heisman potentially depending on how the rest of the quarterbacks do.
Well, you brought up McCord. McCord and him actually were high school teammates. So that's one thing working in their favor. But
they already have great chemistry with each other, even better.
Exactly. But the one thing working against that situation is McCord hasn't played yet. He's played in a very, very limited role. And because of that, who knows how long it'll take him to get going. If we don't see the passing game thrive pretty early, then is he going to be able to reach those numbers that he has to reach if he wants to be the second receiver to win it in the last,
I think so. I think Devonta Smith was in the exact same situation. He loses to Tagovailoa. In comes an unproven, unplayed Mac Jones. And Devonta still wins the Heisman anyway. In fact, we can even use that situation to parallel it. It may be even more likely that if Harrison has a huge season, voters may be more likely to give him the award as he's more known than McCord currently is.
That's a great point. Well, I'm going to move on to another Big Ten player. Running back at Penn State, Nick Singleton, whose odds are at plus 6,600 right now. I think there's some serious value there. He was a true freshman last year. He had a breakout campaign with over 1,000 yards rushing, 13 touchdowns. And in my opinion, Penn State's going to have to lean on the run game even more than they did last year. Now, Sean Clifford wasn't the greatest passer, but he was serviceable. He's been there for a long time. Now you've got a new quarterback coming in Drew Aller. He's supposed to be great, but like I had said about the Ohio State quarterback, he's going to have to warm up. Who knows what that transition is going to be like, going from a consistent starter in Clifford to now Drew Aller. I really think if Penn State is that team we think they are, which is 10 plus wins, potentially competing for a Big Ten championship and even a playoff spot, they're going to have to rely a lot on this guy. Plus 6,600 odds seems like a really good value. So this is one of my favorite plays.
Yeah, I like to look there for sure. I mean, Penn State's in a very difficult division in that Big Ten East. They have to go against Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Indiana, very difficult teams. But if they can come out and get that Big Ten championship game berth, beating Ohio State, beating Michigan, you're going to see a lot of buzz for Nick Singleton. I 100% agree with you.
Well, they're at Ohio State this year, home against Michigan. They finish off with Rutgers and Michigan State. So hopefully he can pop off in one of those games to have a shot, because I don't think the Rutgers or Michigan State games are going to do him any favors. The other guy you had mentioned, which I love this one, I wanted to get to him so bad because I didn't even think about him. He wasn't on my radar. DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State now. What do you think about plus 8,000?
Yeah, when we were prepping for this video, we wanted to find some long shots, and I see DJ at his odds, and I was absolutely shocked. This is a guy who was the #2 overall preseason Heisman favorite only 2 years ago. And he's got a high pedigree, a 5-star recruit. He's a guy that if he has a huge season, voters are going to have no issues voting for him. Now, he transferred to Oregon State. He's left Clemson. He had a lot of issues at Clemson. It just didn't work out there. But he's got a lot of talent. He's shown that he's got a big arm. He's shown that he's fast, that he's huge. He's been able to have huge games in the past. Oregon State, just like Oregon, just like Washington, just like USC, is in the Pac-12. They got to go against the easy slates of defense, and he's going to be able to have the chance to put up huge numbers in this defense optional conference. If Oregon State has a big year, let's say they go 10-2, maybe they make it to the Pac-12 championship game, you're going to see DJ shoot up the Heisman odds list. He's going to be given all the credit for that, and people are going to have no issues voting for him. So as a long shot, really, really like DJ at plus 8,000.
In any other year, you saying Oregon State going 10-2 would sound absolutely ridiculous, but they played great last year. They're on the up and up. They have a really good coaching staff now. Here's the thing about DJ. When he was at Clemson, they transitioned with the offensive coordinator, and they had the wrong guy, right? It was apparent that he was struggling in that system, and because he struggled in that system and had to leave, I think there's a lot of hope that he can get back to the form that we saw him as a true freshman. He was never elite at Clemson, but because he has that pedigree, like you said, he's the former 5-star, he does have elite athleticism. I think he can do some damage, especially in the Pac-12. The other quarterback who I find really interesting as a long shot is Tanner Mordecai at plus 12,500 odds. Yes, Wisconsin's QB is getting plus 12,500 odds. And I'll tell you why this is so intriguing. Number one, Wisconsin's a team who plays in the Big Ten West. The Big Ten West is known for mediocre football. I hate to say it as a Nebraska fan, but every team in the West is average. Every team is a team you can go out and beat. It's not like the East, where you've got Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, who can dominate you. There is no dominant force on the West. So if Wisconsin in their first year under Luke Fickell can get to 9-10 wins, which I think is very possible, Mordecai is going to be the face of their program. And being the face of a Wisconsin program that's headed to a Big Ten championship means those plus 12,500 odds are going to be out the window real quick, especially because Mordecai is a high-level passer, and he's now got Phil Longo at OC, who formerly worked with Drake May, who's the OC at North Carolina. I can't afford not to take it.
I completely agree with you. The new coaching is the absolute key thing. You got Luke Fickell in there, who's very happy to run a spread-focused, high-powered offense like he did at Cincinnati. Desmond Ridder, didn't he make the Heisman Finals one season his last year, 2 years ago?
He was up for the conversation. I'm not sure if he made it or not.
Yeah, so he already has a quarterback in the last couple of years that had Heisman consideration, and that's at Cincinnati playing in the AAC. Now, as you said, he's in the Big Ten. Wisconsin in the Big Ten West has a great shot to just outright win the Big Ten West. And if they do, you're definitely going to see Mordecai be a big part of that. He was at SMU. They ran a gunslinging type offense, so he's used to slinging the rock around and could definitely put up big numbers.
Back-to-back 3,500-yard seasons, and now he's like a coach who's going to want to throw it even more than that. He's got plenty of weapons. I did pull up their depth chart. They've got C.J. Williams, former 5-star who transferred in from USC. Will Pauling, he's a former Cincinnati receiver who transferred in. Bryson Green, Oklahoma State receiver who had over 700 yards receiving last year. There's plenty of talent around him. Doesn't include Braylon Allen out the backfield. I just love plus 12,500.
Doesn't even include their offensive line, which is always one of the best in the country.
Yeah, there's a lot to say positive. Now, I know the one argument is he supposedly had a rough spring and it's been a hard transition for him, but I don't pay too much attention to that. There's going to be so much growth between spring and when that first game comes in the fall. But thank you, Jake. I think we got a lot here. This was awesome, and I've got some picks now for sure.
Absolutely. This is great to chop it up. I'm really looking forward to this college football season.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Peace.